Welcome everyone to episode 10 of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts and today my guest is Bonnie Knight, who is a live sound engineer as well as a studio sound engineer and producer. Our conversation centers around what it's like to be a live sound engineer and how some of those skills translate into the studio, as well as some of their favorite plugins and hardware and the similarities between live mixing and studio mixing. It's going to be an awesome episode, so stay tuned. This is episode 10 of What's That Sound? You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts. Today, my guest is Bonnie Knight. Bonnie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. I know it was a little tough to navigate. You've been sick. There's all stuff going on, but thanks for making the time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Now let's kick it off with anyone that doesn't know who you are. Can you give us a bit of a rundown of who you are and what you do in the music industry?
So I'm probably predominantly sound engineer and also producer. I've kind of come into it from a live sound background, but as time goes on, it's sort of leaning more towards studio. But yeah, I've toured for years as a live engineer, and yeah, now more focusing on producing and studio engineering.
Unreal. Let's take it back to the beginning. Where did music come into play for you?
Very much right at the start. My dad was a musician. So yeah, the first show I ever went to was as a baby to the Big Day Out when I was 3 months old or something.
Yeah, wicked. I can't think of many people that would have had that experience as a baby, so it's pretty sick.
Yeah, it kind of it hadn't really clicked till recently that I was like, wow, I just have this life that's been filled with music. So I think it really informs the way I do things, you know?
Yeah. Who were the kind of like, who'd you listen to and who'd you grow up listening to?
My dad always listened to heaps and heaps of different music. And I remember there being like a whole wall of CDs at our house, and I would just choose the ones that I liked the cover of the most. So yeah. I remember really liking Prince Diamonds and Pearls because it had a really sparkly cover, but
that's
I don't know
not
if
a bad thing.
I loved Prince. But then I feel like when I had 7 to 12, I had a bit of a pop rebellion where I just was like, no, I don't want to listen to your daggy old music, Dad. I'm just going to listen to Delta Goodrem. So
yeah, right, yeah.
And then when I was 12, I just went through this really huge Beatles phase and bought every Beatles CD and listened to purely the Beatles for a year.
Unreal.
And then I kind of went back into a wider selection of music after that.
Yeah, cool. And then, so that was when you were younger, when you were like, what, under 10, or was that teenage years?
The Beatles thing?
Yeah.
Or, it was when I was 12. I remember going to high school and being like, whoa, the Beatles are so cool. And I saw the White Stripes on the school holidays, and everyone else was like, I saw Jesse McCartney.
Yeah, cool. And so then did it kind of, obviously music played a big part, but do you play instruments, by the way?
Yeah, so I played. After that, I joined a band when I was like 15 and played bass in a band for 8 years. Mm-hmm. But I don't really... It was kind of clear to me that I didn't want to be a musician as such. And I found that, I guess, confusing because I was like, I love music, but I don't want to be a musician. So it took me a bit to go, oh, you can work at music and work on music without being a musician.
Yeah. I think, obviously when you're in high school, you don't really know, unless you're very clued into that world. You only know the performers. You only know the artists and bands that you listen to and that you see on, like, back in, 10, 15 years ago, DVDs, and you're watching all the band DVDs, and you don't there wasn't really much talk about, sound engineers and producers and stuff. Yeah, so I can understand that. Where did like the production and engineering stuff, or live engineering, where did that come into play? Did you go to school or anything like that?
Yeah, so after high school, I studied like a bunch of different things. Like I went and studied fine art for a bit, and I went and studied science for a bit, and none of it really clicked. And then I decided that I wanted to keep working in music. So I applied for this music industry degree, which seems kind of funny now, and I didn't get in. So I went to TAFE, and it was sound production TAFE. And then once I got there, I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like,
and where was that?
At RMIT.
Yeah, nice. Yep.
Yeah.
And so what was your experience of schooling? What are you remembering now back then? What was it like?
Well, I guess actually like TAFE worked really well for me. Like I never, or particularly towards the end of high school, wasn't that good at like sitting down and writing and stuff. So despite, like, I didn't mean to do it, but once I got there, I was like, oh, this like practical learning is really beneficial and works way better with my brain and stuff.
Absolutely. And getting the hands on, I know at RMIT, I didn't study there. I studied at what was NMIT, which is now Polytechnic, but very similar thing. I did a recording at RMIT with a guy that I knew that was studying there, and it's cool. You got a huge analog desk set up at the time that I was there, but it's like this gear that you only see in videos and stuff. You just you get your hands on it and you're like, this is unreal. Like, to be able to do it every day is crazy.
Well, it's because I didn't really go in as an audio nerd, I guess. Like, I definitely became one, but I remember being like, yeah, I understand that this is like the best stuff. But now I look back and I'm like, whoa, that was like the best stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. And so do you remember having any kind of like producer people that you looked up to back then? Obviously you weren't really clued into the producer world at that stage, but do you remember if there was anyone that you remember being like that, they're my go-to?
No, not at all. Like I remember there being an assignment that was like you had to do a presentation on a producer. And I think it took me, even though I was like studying it took me a while to work out that was a job. So I was like, oh, what's something I want to focus on? So like now I kind of, can be like, oh, I love this person or this person. But at the time, I think I did it on that Enya's producer, who's like her husband, I think, or maybe her brother, I don't know, some kind of relationship.
Yeah.
And which it seems really funny because you don't think, oh, who's your favorite producer? Enya's producer. But I think I was just really interested about the reverb or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I probably would have taught you a lot just doing that one assignment about, finding out about effects and processing and stuff. Maybe, who knows? But so do you remember then, obviously you graduated, or did you go straight into another job then, or?
So I started doing live sound, and then I was still kind of thought that I wanted to work in film. Like at that point I thought I want to work on film soundtracks.
Right.
So I went and it was like an option to do an extra year and a half and turn it into a degree, a Bachelor of Sound Design. So I went and did that. I don't, like, looking back on it seems wild to me that I was studying, I think, full-time and also working probably full-time. But I'm always very busy and I always probably take on too much. So, yeah, I went and did that. And then I really enjoyed that kind of work. I really liked sort of working to a brief and that kind of thing. But as I started to work more in music, I just realized, I think it just took me a while to work out that it was like a tangible path. I had this concept that no one could ever make a living off music. So
then how did you come to understand that then?
making a living off music.
Yeah,
I was
fair
just
enough.
making
Just doing
enough
it.
money to live. I like quit my bar job and was like, oh, I guess I can just do this as a job. That's cool.
Yeah. And so what were you primarily mixing? Was it a specific venue, or did you mix for a band or anything like that? Or
I don't really know. At the start, I think I did a bit of in-housing at some venues, but it was mostly because I had come from being already in a music scene. I guess once I started doing it and I was, I guess, good at it, people just asked me to mix their shows. I had that network already. It wasn't.
Yep. And so then how long did that how long did that last, the live? I mean, you're still doing live stuff, I know, but when did that transition into more of the producing and engineering?
I guess there wasn't really a catalyst or anything. It's almost like a
just trying a whole bunch of different things and seeing what works.
I just started doing it occasionally and then realized that I want to do that more. Like I really love being a part of live music and all of the positive parts of that. But if I look at my life in 5 years from now, I don't really want to be touring anymore. So I realized that I sort of had to make a conscious effort to move. And then I guess COVID happened and there was no live music. And so it was kismet almost.
Kind of a feast or famine type thing. You got to find something.
Well, no, not even. It was like something I already wanted to do and it just coincidentally fell in line with a terrible global event. So
Totally.
I had to force
did you
myself.
have anyone that kind of mentored you along the way, especially first off in the live thing? Were you figuring it out yourself mostly? Was there a group of people or anything like that?
In live, I mean, when I did work in a bar, one of my really good friends, Guy, who is a live engineer and also a studio, we became friends because I accidentally stabbed myself in the hand and I couldn't bartend, and so I was doing the door at the Evelyn, and he would do sound there all the time, and the door was like kind of near the sound desk, and I'd watch him, and I was like studying sound. And I was like, oh, could you like tell me about this? Which is really funny that's how we met, because now we're really good friends and it's been years and stuff. So I guess him as a starting mentor, but also peer,
Yeah, absolutely. And then moving into the producing and engineering, was there people that guided you there, or, did you kind of just ask a bunch of people if I could jump in on a session or anything like that?
I did ask. I think maybe this is why it took a while to move as much as I have. But I feel like I always expressed a lot of interest. Like I was like emailing studios being like, hey, I'll like come work for free. Like I'm like good at rolling cables and stuff like that. And I did some internships and things, and they were, I don't know, it was always felt really unwelcoming or something.
Right.
So no, I haven't really had mentors in that sense.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what was it about that experience that made it feel unwelcoming?
I mean, it's really hard to say. I know that it's not like an easy industry, but I feel like, I don't know, it's weird to say now. There was like instances where I like asked if I could assist someone and they were like, no, I don't take assistants, and then had an assistant like the next week, and it was like, what am I doing wrong? But
and does that those sorts of experiences, does that change how you operate now as doing your own jobs? Does that influence you? Like, I'm never gonna be that to anyone.
Yeah, like I feel like whenever people contact me about Hasn't happened in a while, but occasionally I'll get someone be like, "Oh, can I ask you some questions or whatever?" I'll always try and be friendly and responsive unless I'm really busy.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and beautiful. And let's dive
But
into, you know, some of the sessions that you've worked on. I mean, you've worked with some pretty awesome acts like Amyl and the Sniffers, Teen Jesus and God, that's hard to say. Teen Jesus and Gene Teasers and Greta Ray and things like that. Like some pretty great acts that are doing some really cool stuff in the industry. So what did that look like? Was it kismet? Was it just being in the right place at the right time? How did that all happen?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think I'm a really lucky person. Like, I'm really hardworking and I'm really dedicated and stuff. But I think that underneath that, there's like a bed of, being in the right place at the right time or luck or like, I don't know. I've said that to people and they're like, no, you're just really nice. And I'm like, yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
But yeah, Amyl, it was kind of funny. I was like in Sydney. I moved to Sydney for a little bit during the pandemic or during the lockdowns. And their manager was like, "Hey, do you want to come engineer this album?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm in Sydney though." And I was like, "You know what? I'm not doing anything else." So I went to Melbourne in the middle of a lockdown to record that album.
Yeah.
Teen Jesus and the Gene Teasers.
They must love that, by the way. They must love when people just consistently mess up their name.
Yeah. That's kind of, I guess, going back to that concept of already having this network thing. Like I'd met one of them, but I think that I got asked to do the job because Alex Leahy was producing, and Alex, like, I met when I was about 16. Like, her band used to play with my band years ago. So
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And what do those sessions look like? I think from listening through the Amyl and the Sniffers album, there's obviously I want to talk about your music style, but the actual sound of Amyl is like, it's raw punk rock, you know, it's noisy, but I think every song has its own sort of a sound, especially like drum sounds, guitar sounds, all that sort of thing. Was that intentional in those sessions, or did it just turn out that way? Did they have multiple mixes, etc.? Like what was all that about?
Well, I didn't mix it. Nicola Nay did, who's from the UK. So I don't know much specifically about the mixing, but
Right.
I mean, it was kind of, I'd heard them before and I'd met them before. And then when I got sent the demos, I was like, wow, this is like really a huge step forward for them in a songwriting sense. It felt really like, like it's really easy, I guess, particularly for punk bands to do a second album and it be
The same.
just the same, but it really felt like a developed artist step.
Yep.
And Dan Lascombe was a producer, and he, like, I think I'd met him before. Maybe I hadn't. I don't think I'd met him before. And it was kind of a funny thing where we're at the studio. I was like, "Hi, Dad." He was like, "Hi." And he's like, he has played in heaps of bands and is like really good at, guitar tones and structure and like maybe we'll do this bit or like play it in this way, that kind of producer. And I was like, "Oh, what do you want it to sound like?" He was like, "Oh, you just do what you think." And I was like, "Okay, cool." So we really kind of worked well together in that sense.
That's awesome. So that obviously there was a trust aspect there that you guys had built up to, allow for you to do your thing, for them to do their thing.
I mean, we'd never met, so it wasn't really trust. It was just innate, or I guess it's trust, but innate trust rather than built on anything.
Yeah. When you are working with new people, do you take a lot of time to get to know them? Like obviously that one was the way it was, but all the other acts that you work with, do you take time to get to know them before the sessions, or do you like to just jump straight in?
Yeah, no, I like to. I mean, actually, with that album, we had a day of setup, so it was kind of like someone came in and tuned the drum kit and stuff. So we had that day to get to chat I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, like usually if I've got sessions and stuff, I'll always do, particularly if it's production, I'll do like some kind of pre-production meeting. Mostly, I mean, obviously to see what's we're going to do and stuff, but I think it just works better to be able to chat to someone, get to know them a little bit before you like try and take on this
Yeah,
task.
absolutely,
You know?
absolutely. The Sonics, in terms of the acts that you worked with in the past and currently, they, to me, it's either like really raw, really like punk. There's a punk aspect to it, or it's gentle pop stuff. So there's like, it's an interesting sort of like, I don't know what the word is, but an interesting two dimensions there. Are they just your favorite styles of music, or is it coincidence, or where does that come from?
I think it's a little bit coincidence. I think about it all the time in terms of I listen to so many different types of music. I really want to work on lots of different types of music, and I feel like particularly in Australia, sometimes engineers and producers kind of get pigeonholed, or like it is a lot of word of mouth and stuff, so it'll be like, oh, so and so worked on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like really actively want to not just work on one kind of music, or I guess two kinds of music. But I also, going back to the childhood thing, is quite funny because my dad played in a punk band and I grew up around all these punks.
Can you name
But
drop? I want to hear the name.
he was in a band called the Scavengers. They were like a New
Okay.
Zealand punk band.
Right.
Like I grew up across the street from Roland S. Howard, like would walk to school together kind of vibe.
Cool.
It was very like St. Kilda punk scene. So, and then I listened to like a lot of pop music, like day to day. I listened to like very straight up pop music a lot of the time.
Awesome.
And other stuff, lots of other stuff in between.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny because I feel like that is sort of like an accurate portrait of me somehow, which is maybe a coincidence. I don't know.
Well, I think, we obviously, I've said it before in this podcast, we bring our own personalities into our music because it's just what we do. It's like, and it's an expression or an extension of who we are. And so I think even in the pop stuff that you make, you might be, subconsciously bringing in some of that punk aspect. Let's like leave this a bit loose, or, a bit messy, just because it's your personality. So I think that generally just makes a whole lot of sense. To your sessions, they look pretty similar across the board. Do you have a similar structure in the way that you like to do things? Is there, do you start off with the pre-production, let's do some songwriting, or that sort of thing? Or do the bands come to you with stuff already done?
It really varies, I think, because, like I have friends who everything they do will be in a small room. Like maybe they'll go record some drums later or something. But like some of the things I do are like, hey, we're a band, we want to record, and we go from that angle. Or other things are like, hey, this is a solo artist, and then we will record whatever live instrumentation afterwards. But it really varies because of that. And also, I guess the last couple of years I lived in Sydney for a bit, and then since I've been back in Melbourne, I've been kind of like, I've moved studios a couple of times, and so I'm kind of, I guess, still trying to figure out if there is a specific workflow in that sense, but I think, it changes artist to artist.
What's your favorite way to do it then?
Oh, if I could choose anything, I would have a giant studio that I owned with all of the best things, and then you could do anything you want in there. But that's obviously not that easy. So
yeah. So, but in terms of the actual process, like what's your favorite way to approach a recording session?
I don't think I have a favorite way. I think it really depends on the artist, because different artists work differently. So, some people work in bursts, like, okay, let's just do a week on this thing, or some people work better a day a week or whatever. So I think my favorite way is just whatever is the most productive in terms of what works for the artist, or like what works for me in relation to working with the artist.
Yeah. Does that usually come from the artist, or are you more directing like, okay, based on, their personalities and things like that, we need to do it this way? Or is it more like just go with the flow?
Go with the flow within reason.
Yeah.
Go with the structured flow.
Has there been any sort of times where that hasn't worked, and how do you navigate those sorts of situations?
I mean, the only thing I guess is, sometimes often people have a budget, or like they work full time or something, some kind of other constraint, in which case you just have to do things when you can, or for how long you can,
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to like a great session, like you walk away from the studio after a day or a week or whatever it might be, and you'd be like, that was awesome. What do those sessions look like? Are they high energy, or are they really chill and relaxed?
I mean, I'm pretty sure everything I do is kind of chill and relaxed. Even if it's, 5 songs in a day or whatever, I'll still be chill and relaxed about it.
So. Yeah. So the enjoyment, where does that come from in terms of, the recordings? Are you loving the production side of things? Are you really hands-on there? Or is it like getting sounds?
I think one informs the other, like I feel like, because I come from a sound engineer vibe, or like, doing that sound design degree and stuff, I am very like sound focused. And if something doesn't sound good, I'll be like, was it that good? But I think that kind of sound informs the production arc or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Has there ever been sort of any times where, especially in your own sessions, where you've had to kind of go, oh man, this isn't working? Is there always sort of things that pop up to you as like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to work around this?
I think it's only ever sort of about me or about the artist, like when someone's just having a bad day or like low energy, or something's kind of going on, whether that be me or the artist or artists. When it's the artist, I'm very good at being like, okay, I understand, da, da, da. When it's me, I'm like, oh no, it's me. I should have like had more sleep, or I should have done less stuff last week, or, and I get in my head about it a bit. But I think I'm trying to be a bit more aware of my energy and how to plan my life around it.
Sure. And so when those times sort of happen, like how do you address it? Is it like, let's cut the session off here and come back another day, or how do you push through?
Usually like go for a walk, or maybe if like work on something else, if there's like another song or something. Or I feel like there's occasionally times where I'll be like, I know that I am at my end today, and I'll be like, let's resume. But I'll usually try and push through for at least 5 hours or something.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because you never know when you're going to get that second burst of energy, and sometimes those are the times when the best stuff comes out. And so sometimes, cutting it off and being like, oh, I mean, a lot of the time it's like, if we're booked in, we can't cancel it because it's your money, and it's like, it's my money too, So it's like, I'm not going to necessarily cut this short, and,
Yeah, that's mostly just from a production spaces. If it was engineering, I would just push through.
Yeah, 100%. Do you, what then are some of the hardest things, do you think, about being a producer or an engineer in live and then in the studio? Because I think we haven't had many live engineers talking, so I would like to unpack that a bit.
I actually think that live engineering is really good. What's the word? Like training, I guess. As in live circumstances are just so stressful and there's so much that can go wrong, and you really, particularly if you're like on a tour, you have to push through no matter what, and to an extent where maybe some of that stuff's a bit unhealthy, but once you've done that, you can do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the reason why I stopped doing as much live stuff as I used to is purely the stress factor. And some people thrive on that. Some people just like love being put in difficult scenarios and troubleshooting and try and figure it out. But that, that 1 or 2 hours before a gig to me is like unbearable. Once the gig started and we're mixing and stuff, it's great. Like it's so enjoyable. But that hour or two before where, why can't I hear any subs or something like that? And you can't figure out the system shit, that shit just like, it's too much for me, but some people love that. Are you one of those people that just love those sorts of scenarios?
I would not say love. I do love problem solving. I like, once the problem's solved, I like problem solving. And I feel like you pretty much always solve the problem, unless there's something broken. But
it's a good point. It's a good point.
Anything you can do. But yeah, I think I definitely don't thrive off stress, but I think I am good at repressing stress, I guess, in a way that I don't, if something goes wrong, I'm not like, or at least outwardly.
Yeah. And does that, so you were saying that like really helps you from coming from that place going into the studio. Are there specific things that you can talk about that are similarities in the studio to live?
Yeah, I guess the problem solving, or just basic signal flow stuff. I feel like everyone I know that does live in studio, it's if you've had to patch a stage before, you can patch a studio much quicker or more efficiently. And I feel like actually the big one is dealing with people. Like you have to deal with so many people in a live sound scenario. So, and good days and bad days of artists and stuff. So that kind of skill is really translatable and beneficial in the studio.
Absolutely. And it's huge, it's amplified even more because it is a high stress environment. Well, it can be, like you said, depending on whether the artists are, drugs and alcohol influence things, sleep influences things, and people can react to those sorts of scenarios. If things aren't going right, you have to be able to just figure it out because it's your job. And, you're right. Those sorts of times definitely set you up for the studio where it is much more of like, okay, we've got a little bit of time to figure it out. I don't want the artist to be sitting there thinking that I've got no idea what's going on, but it definitely allows you to take control, I think, a lot easier in those stressful situations that might occur in the studio. Hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support, and let's get back to it. Awesome. So let's get a little bit nerdy. I always like to unpack some of the favorite gear and tools and software and stuff like that people that join me on this podcast love to use. So, and I think yours will be interesting as well because live engineering is quite different to studio engineering and mixing. So first of all, what are some of your favorite pieces of hardware in a live scenario and then in a studio scenario?
Live wise, I came into it at a purely digital part of live sound. I've mixed shows on an analog console before, but it was when I started out, there was pretty much no analog consoles except for like really small rooms where there was like, Mix Wizard or something in the corner.
Yep.
So recently I've gotten really into Ellen and Heath D Lives as a console. I just feel like, particularly in their like small format console, they have all of these routing things and, you know, their inbuilt compressor modes and stuff that are really cool. But I think I've come to this realization that it really depends on the band, which sort of, particularly in a studio sense, but I guess a lot of live engineers will be like, this is the console I use and I use it for everything.
Yeah. What things, unpack that.
Okay, so I just did a tour with Amyl and the Sniffers, and I didn't tour a console, so I got to use lots of different consoles along the way. And without a doubt, the best thing, or the thing that worked the best, was Profiles or S6Ls, Avid consoles, because you can just use Waves plugins on them. Whereas I know, you know, like Digicos or even D-Lives and stuff, you can have Waves servers and use Waves plugins with them. But yeah, obviously we weren't touring that stuff. And I guess, you know, having SSL bus comps and good analog tapey sounding delays, you know, H delay and stuff, just really works for them. Whereas if I was mixing live something more pop orientated, I would prefer like a newer, cleaner, crispier console. Which, you know, D-Labs and stuff are really, and Digicos and stuff are really good at, but it's harder to make them sound dirty or more saturated or any of those things without those external wave servers and stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And so then what about studio? What's some of your favourite pieces of hardware studio-wise? That can include mics as well.
So this mic I really like, the Sony, well, this is a 38B.
Yep.
I think I would prefer to have a 37, but they were really expensive. They're quite expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really depends. Yeah, again, because I do work on lots of different things, I think it depends on the thing. And so it's, you know, constantly learning, oh, this works with this, but this doesn't, you know, it doesn't work with this.
Yeah.
I'm really into effects. Like I really love reverb and delay and chorus and stuff like that. And I find that I'll always buy little cheap, weird, random stuff because I think having kind of, you know, you can get Valhalla verb or whatever and it sounds really good. But having something kind of random might be like the more interesting, bringing something more interesting to the music.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's always fun to like, for me, to play around with stuff and see how I can misuse plugins, because that is when it gets really interesting and you can be like, I wonder if this would work on this track, and then it just brings this sound that you never would have thought about, and it also just makes your your music stand out and sound different to everyone else's, which I think is really important.
Totally. Yeah, I guess if I am recording like full band situation, a lot of the time I'll do it at Sound Park in Northcote, and Idge, the owner, just has this like incredible collection of microphones and outboard gear that I will never own all of. So yeah, again, it's sort of circumstantial. If I'm kind of trying to, in a mixing sense, be like, okay, it's okay that I will never own, you know, a bunch of this stuff. So and it's also, I've been thinking about it lately in terms of like every time I bounce stems, I'm like, oh, it's so good that I didn't do it. You know, I did this all in the books. You know, like
yeah. So do you like to like use hardware on the way in?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I feel like I really love the tactility of it, and I think like I think if I was alive, engineering in the 70s or something, I would have really loved working with tape all the time and working with outboard gear and stuff all the time. But
Yeah, there is definitely something about it being able to manipulate the sound as it's happening, and baking it in. It limits your options on the way out in terms of being able to mix it differently, but that can be really beneficial for speed purposes. Getting the sound great on the way in is always important, especially for miking. But not only that, using some outboard gear like, compressor or EQ that gives that sound its character that you couldn't necessarily, you might be able to get with a plug-in, but you might spend hours trying to find that sound if you're not familiar with a whole bunch of different plugins. So what about software? What system do you use?
I use Pro Tools for mixing and recording, and I use Ableton if I'm doing some kind of producery thing that needs drum beats or synths and stuff, which is kind of a really clunky thing to do, particularly if I produce something in Ableton and then I'm mixing it as well. I'll end up carrying it across to Pro Tools, and it's very annoying. And I've kind of got this dream of learning how to use Cubase, because I feel like the people that use it that I know and watched use it, I'm like, wow, it does all of the things in one spot. But then,
should give Studio One a try just quietly. It's amazing.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Persona Studio One.
Oh, another one.
It's amazing. I will not brag about it, but I will promote it till the cows come home. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but it's just the best software. But anyway, that's just me having my 2 cents.
Yeah, I don't know. I find MIDI and stuff in Pro Tools really clunky, and I'll try and do it, but it just, But then I love mixing in Pro Tools, and I've used it for years, and I know all the key commands, and
100%. Yeah, beautiful. And then plugin wise, let's start off with EQs. What are some of your go-tos? I know it depends on the act, but is there that's my one?
Fab Filter Pro Q, very basic vibe, but
I think everyone on this podcast has mentioned that for good reason.
Very easy. Actually, the other day I was listening to this podcast with Miramaster, Miramaster?
Yep.
And he was like, I don't use any EQs that have a visual thing. I just use da da da. And I was like,
yeah.
But you know what? I don't really look, because I guess from live sound and stuff, I have pretty good frequency ear. I don't ever really look at the picture. It's just the workflow of it seems really easy, and
100%.
It's very transparent and blah blah blah.
For sure.
But sometimes if I want to use sometimes I'll use a SSL E channel or G channel, but only if I'm think of it.
Is there something that you're looking for when you're using specific plugins, or is it just I need to get this sound, let's go?
I think it's a bit of both. Sometimes, whether it just be functional or stylistic. If I'm just doing some kind of functional EQ, I'll use Fab Filter, for example. But if it's I want something a little bit more tonal or something, I'll maybe reach for something else.
Yeah, absolutely. What about compressors?
I use the UAD 1176 heaps.
Yeah.
I've been using the isotope one lately a bit.
Right.
The neutron.
Yeah.
Compressor.
Yeah, love it. I've been eyeing off Neutron 4 because that thing looks pretty crazy. Some of the stuff that I can do looks very impressive. But
I only ever really use I'll use the de-esser, or I'll no, do they have a de-esser? I'll use the
I think so, yeah.
exciter, or I'll use the compressor, but I never really use the full chain for some reason, even though I think that's the point of the plugin.
Yeah, but, some of the DSPs are better than others, so I'm the same. If there's any, multi effects plugins, there's usually one or two of the sections that I'll use over others because they have a specific sound or functionality, right? Like, or whatever. What about reverbs? You're a big fan of reverbs. Let's talk that.
Yeah. I just got the Arturia Effects collection, which is so good. It sounds so good, and there's a really nice plate, but it's very clean. It's a very clean plate, but it sounds real. It just sounds it sounds like a very clean, real plate. So
I love it.
The last week I've been using that quite a bit.
There's something about reverbs, obviously digital reverbs, is like to get them to actually sound usable half the time, you have to do so much processing or pre-processing before or after the reverb to actually get it to sound like a good reverb. So some of the coolest reverbs are the ones that sound.
I find specifically with plates as well. Like I used to always think I don't really get plate reverb. Like I don't think it sounds very good. And then I used a real plate and I was like, oh, wow, plate reverbs are so cool. But I haven't really found a digital version until this Arturia one that I've been like, yeah, this is good.
Awesome.
So I use that. I use the Eventide. Is it SP 2016 quite a lot. And UAD AMS. I use
delays?
Heaps of different reverbs. Delays. I really like the Echo Cat, and as like a sort of slappy thing. And I really like the Valhalla delay. It's like can do anything and almost does too many different things. It's like I sit there going, oh, this one, no, this one, this one.
Do you have a favorite element in mixes that you love to work on?
I think maybe the spatiality. I don't know if that's a word, but of things.
Let's make it a word.
I really love mixes and production that's like very clear in a spatial sense. So yeah, if I can get that happening, I'm always like, this is the best thing. But yeah, like vocal effects, I guess, as well, which kind of plays into that.
So you were talking for your own mixes, getting something to have nice space and sort of that you can, intelligibility is probably a good word for it. But what are some of your favorite mixes that when you hear what is it about a good mix to you? Like, can you explain what you think a good mix is?
I mean, I feel like it's very subjective. And also I listen to lots of things that I don't necessarily think this is the best mix of. But I do like, Miramasa. Those mixes just like blow my mind. Like I like how it's like a feeling or something. It's not even, it's like I don't even really understand. But I think a lot of that comes from like the production with him. But okay, so I've been listening to the new Beyonce album lots, and it's really interesting because I feel like the production is so cool and it's like so well thought out. And I listened to this podcast about it, and it, like how she just cleared all the samples and had enough money to just be like, I want this, I'm gonna do this thing, which is really cool. But it's interesting because listening to it, I'm not like I love the mix. Like, I don't think it's bad. I think it's good. I think it serves the exact function it needs. But it's been really interesting to me because I'm like, I really love this album, but I'm not like, wow, the mix sounds really good. I'm just like, wow, the album is really good,
Well, I think that's an important thing to mention is some of the best artists in the world, you can sit back and listen to it and go, kind of doesn't hit the mark, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's not actually about that. It's about, everything plays a part in a production and a mix that brings it all together and makes it that package. And it's really important to be aware of that as a producer choosing sounds, choosing the right, instruments, what will get this song to that place, if that makes sense. And I mean, I've listened to some of the greatest artists in the world, and you're like, it's kind of shitty. Like Coldplay, for example, some of their mixes to me aren't good mixes, but it really just doesn't matter because the emotion's there, and that is somewhat of a vibe in itself for it to be kind of a bit like set it up and go type deal. So it's a really, really good point. What I like to do before we start to wrap it up is to get some of your potentially good pieces of advice for, first of all, producers or engineers, and then if there's any artists listening, to give some advice to some artists.
Ooh, broad question.
Yeah. Let's start with like producers and engineers. This is pointed towards people that might just be getting started, and
Sure.
some of the best things that you've learnt.
I feel like there's just so much stuff on the internet. Like you can learn anything on the internet. And so, yeah, spending time on the internet learning things, which I still, I do every day.
Yeah.
Which is kind of basic. But also just, I guess, and like, I mean, I deal with this, and everyone I know that is in music or even in creative industries deals with this, but it's like everyone is on a different path, and there's like this weird thing of people comparing themselves to other people, which just like digs everyone into a hole, and everyone goes through that at one point or another. So
I love that. And I think, to jump off on that point as well, is that you might think that there's a specific way to go about getting a result. But like you said, everyone's on their own path and nothing's linear. It doesn't, A doesn't equal
I
B.
say that all the time. I'm always like, nothing's linear.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think because of the misconception of not only social media, but just stories that you hear through people, is that, they blew up because of SoundCloud, or, they did this and they got that job, where there's so many pieces of that puzzle that you are not seeing. And so it's a really great point that, everyone's on their different path. So just like live in the moment and take the advantages that come to you. Yeah, I love that. What about then for, like artists? Do you have any specific feedback for, artists that want to work with producers or engineers?
Yeah. Let me think about that. Oh, okay. So I feel like artists, pretty much every single artist, I reckon, that I've ever worked with who's sent me a demo has said, it's not very good. It's just a demo. Da, da, da. And I'm like, yeah, like that's why you're coming to me. Like it's fine. Or like, oh, my rough mixes, And so it's funny. I think it's just like embedded in people to like be a little bit self-deprecating or something, or maybe I don't know. So don't worry if demo, a producer or engineer's job is to like hear the good in something, not like the bad, I guess. And I think that's it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, I do it all the time with like unfinished mixes. It's like, oh, I've still got this to do, or I've still got that to do. It's like, people don't care. They don't care. They like, if you're working on it and it's not finished, it's not finished. Like, it's totally fine. Like, yeah, we all have our part to play, and, you can have things to say about the end result, but even in 5 years' time, we listen back to those works that we did at that time, and we'll always find something that we could have done better. But it's where you are at the time, and that's a really important thing. Just go with it. I think that is what gives anything its sound. Is like, that's a point in time for you, whether you're a producer, or an engineer, or an artist. You're at this point in your life. Just go with it. I love it. Yep. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. What I want to know is, where can people find you? How can they get in touch?
Instagram, I guess.
Yep.
Or
what's your handle?
Bonnie Vasilia Amelia Knight. BONNIEVEZELIAMELIAKNIGHT, which is really long.
Yeah, making it easy for people.
Like an alphabet. Yeah, that's probably the best
Beautiful.
place.
Beautiful. Anything that you've got coming up that you want to promote?
Nope.
That's all good. That's all good. No worries. Well, we'll have links in the show notes for your playlist. Yeah, we'll have links to your, contact details. If anyone wants to reach out to Bonnie, go for it. Thank you again. And
thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everyone for checking us out, listening in, watching in. Best thing that you can do to share this around to your friends, post it on your stories, all that sort of thing. That's how we can, spread this around. But at the very least, subscribe or follow so you can stay up to date with the new episodes. Thanks again. And thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
All right. See you next time. Thanks for listening to What's That Sound? Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.